December 15, 1944. 11:30 p.m. German Army Headquarters, West Wall. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stood in a bunker deep beneath the German lines. Maps covered every wall. Red arrows indicated the planned attack. German generals had gathered for the final briefing on Operation Herbstnebel, autumn mist. But everyone called it what it was: Germany's last chance to reverse the course of the war. Von Rundstedt was 70 years old, a Prussian officer of the old school, a man who had commanded armies across Europe. He looked at the battle plan with profound skepticism. He knew what the operation required: complete tactical surprise, whether that prevented American air superiority, an advance across difficult terrain in winter, the destruction of American forces in a coordinated breakthrough that would split the Allies and force them to negotiate a separate peace. He knew it was impossible, but he also knew that Hitler had ordered it, and refusing was not an option. The plan was audacious to the point of madness. 3 German armies, Army Group B under Field Marshal Walter Model, with over 200,000 men, 1,400 tanks and assault guns, and 1,600 aircraft, would attack through the Ardennes Forest in Belgium on a narrow front. The terrain was dense, hilly, and cut by rivers. The roads were few and narrow. The weather forecast predicted 5 days of fog and clouds that would keep American aircraft grounded. In those 5 days, German forces had to break through American lines, drive westward toward Antwerp, and sever the supply lines of the British and American armies. It would be, strategically, the most audacious German operation since the invasion of France 18 months earlier. The German generals understood the risks. General Otto von Manschufel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, knew that German tanks were outnumbered and outgunned by American Shermans and the new Pershing tanks. German fuel supplies were critically low. The plan depended on capturing American gasoline dumps within the first days, or the offensive would collapse from fuel starvation. German infantry, mostly drawn from training divisions that had never seen combat, lacked the experience to overcome determined American resistance. The plan was desperate, and everyone in that bunker knew it. But it was also the only plan. The alternative was slow, inevitable defeat as American and Soviet forces crushed Germany in a closing vice. December 16, 1944. 5:30 a.m. American positions. Ardennes Forest. At first light on December 16, 1944, German artillery opened fire across a 120-mile front in the Ardennes Forest. Over 1,400 German guns bombarded American positions. The barrage lasted 90 minutes, the heaviest concentration of artillery fire since the German offensive at Verdun in 1916. American soldiers, dug in along thinly manned defensive positions, heard the ground shake. They had never experienced such concentrated firepower. Officers didn't know what they were facing. Reports came in confused and contradictory. Some said it was a German counterattack. Others thought it was a limited spoiling attack. No one understood that Germany had committed every remaining reserve to one final, desperate gamble. American intelligence had failed completely. G2, the Army Intelligence Section, had assessed that the Germans lacked the strength for a major offensive. The American commander, General Omar Bradley, believed German forces were in retreat. The American First Army, commanded by General Courtney Hodges, held a thin line across the Ardennes with only 4 divisions spread across a 90-mile front. When the German attack began, American forces were caught by surprise, unprepared, and outnumbered. The American formations in the path of the German offensive were not elite units. Many were replacement divisions that had just arrived from America. The 101st Airborne Division, the famous airborne unit, was scattered across multiple positions. The 82nd Airborne, another elite unit, was being withdrawn from the lines for rest and rehabilitation. Most of the ground divisions were overextended. Holding positions meant for twice as many men with half as many weapons. When German tanks began to advance through the fog, American soldiers faced something they had never imagined. German victory seemed possible. The first breakthrough. December 16th to 17th, 1944. German 5th Panzer Army, commanded by General von Manschufel, achieved immediate tactical success. 2 Panzer Corps, the XLVI and XLVII Corps, broke through American lines near the town of Bastogne. American soldiers, confused by the intensity of the attack and overwhelmed by German numbers, began to retreat. Some units fought stubbornly and delayed the German advance. Others broke and ran. German tanks pursued aggressively, advancing farther in the first 2 days than American strategic planners had believed possible. The German strategy was to overwhelm American forces before they could organize a coordinated defense. Speed was essential. The plan required German forces to reach the Meuse River within 5 days and Antwerp within 10 days. Any delay would allow American reserves to concentrate and American air power to return once the weather cleared. German commanders drove their troops relentlessly, sometimes neglecting supply lines in pursuit of speed. Panzer divisions advanced 20 to 30 miles per day, extraordinary distances given the difficult terrain and American resistance. But already cracks were appearing in the German offensive. Fuel consumption was higher than planned. American troops, despite being surprised, were fighting harder than German intelligence assessments had predicted. Supply lines stretched dangerously long. German infantry divisions, supposed to widen the breakthrough and exploit it, were moving too slowly. The timetable that had seemed so tight in the planning bunker became impossible in combat reality. The road to Bastogne, December 17th to 20th, 1944. The critical American position was the town of Bastogne, a road junction where 7 roads converged. If German forces captured Bastogne, they could drive northwest toward Antwerp with their southern flank secured. American command understood this immediately. General Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, committed the 101st Airborne Division to Bastogne. On December 19th, elements of the 101st arrived in the town and prepared defensive positions. The 101st Airborne was commanded by General Anthony McAuliffe, a tough officer who had no intention of surrendering. The division dug in around Bastogne, establishing a defensive perimeter. American engineers destroyed supplies that couldn't be defended, prepared anti-tank positions, and positioned machine guns and riflemen to make any German assault costly. The Germans, confident that American forces would break when confronted by overwhelming German strength, planned to assault Bastogne directly. On December 20th, German forces surrounded Bastogne completely. American troops were trapped inside, cut off from supply lines, low on ammunition, and facing German tanks and infantry. The situation seemed desperate. German commanders sent American commanders surrender demands. General McAuliffe's response became legendary. When asked to surrender, he replied simply, "Nuts." He meant that the Americans would fight to the last man rather than surrender. What McAuliffe understood was that surrender was not the only option. American air power, constrained by weather, was beginning to break through. Weather reports predicted clearing skies within days. Once the fog lifted and American aircraft could operate, German forces would be devastated by air attack. German armor, vulnerable to air attack, would be slaughtered if American fighters gained air superiority. German tanks couldn't hide in the forests of the Ardennes. They needed movement and speed, and American air power would make movement suicide. American counterattack. The race to Bastogne. General George Patton, commanding the American Third Army, understood the strategic situation instantly. The German offensive had created an opportunity. If German forces committed themselves to Bastogne and the fighting around it, they would become vulnerable to American counterattack. Patton wheeled his Third Army north, a maneuver that took enormous logistics and coordination but was accomplished in 48 hours. Patton drove his forces forward at speed, racing to reach Bastogne and cut off the German spearhead. The race between German forces trying to take Bastogne and American forces trying to relieve it became the defining struggle of the battle. German tanks, moving rapidly but running out of fuel, pressed toward Bastogne. American columns raced northward, fighting German forces that tried to block them. For 3 days, the outcome remained uncertain. German forces came within a few miles of Bastogne multiple times but were unable to break through American defenses. American forces raced northward, fighting through German opposition. On December 26th, an American armored column broke through to Bastogne. The siege was lifted. American forces inside Bastogne were no longer trapped. German chances of capturing the town evaporated. With Bastogne still in American hands and American forces now attacking from the south, German strategy collapsed. The offensive, already behind schedule, had failed at its critical objective. The tank battles, Leopards, Panthers, and Shermans. The Battle of the Bulge was fundamentally a tank battle. German panzers, Panther tanks with 75mm guns and Tiger tanks with 88mm guns, were superior to American Sherman tanks in armor protection and firepower. A single Tiger tank could kill multiple Shermans before being destroyed. German tankers understood they had superior equipment. American tankers understood they were in an inferior tank but had to win anyway. German Panther tanks, commanded by veterans with combat experience in Russia and France, operated as coordinated units. They used terrain, concentration of force, and shock tactics. When German panzers encountered American tanks, German commanders tried to concentrate superior numbers at specific points and overwhelm American defensive positions. German tactics emphasized breakthrough and rapid exploitation. American Sherman tanks were inferior individually, but Americans had overwhelming numerical superiority. For every German tank, Americans had 3 or 4 Shermans. American tanks also had advantages: superior reliability in cold weather, better ergonomics for the crew, and superior ammunition capacity. Most importantly, American tactics emphasized combined arms, tanks supported by infantry, artillery, and air power. American tankers understood they couldn't win one-on-one tank duels, so they didn't fight that way. They used speed, fire, and maneuver, and concentrated firepower to overwhelm German positions. The tank battle in the Bulge featured several famous engagements. At Prum, American tanks encountered German Panthers and won a tactical victory through superior numbers and better coordination. At Bastogne, German tanks attacked American positions in urban terrain where German armor couldn't maneuver freely, and American infantrymen with anti-tank weapons could take devastating ambush positions. The German assumption that American forces would collapse when facing panzer assaults proved false. American forces, despite initial surprise, adapted quickly to the threat and responded effectively. Weather changes everything. December 22nd to 23rd, 1944. On December 22nd and 23rd, 1944, the weather broke. Fog lifted. For the first time since the German offensive began, American aircraft could operate. Hundreds of American fighters and bombers took to the air. They found German columns strung out along roads, vulnerable and exposed. What followed was a slaughter. German tanks, unable to maneuver freely in the dense forests and narrow roads, were attacked from above. German columns abandoned vehicles and took cover. German losses mounted exponentially. The Wehrmacht had few fighters to oppose American air superiority. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, committed what little air power it had. On December 24th, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, an attempt to destroy American air bases. The operation achieved surprise initially but ultimately failed. American air bases were damaged but not destroyed. American air power, once committed, could not be stopped. German tanks, exposed and without air cover, became targets for American aircraft armed with rockets and machine guns. German intelligence had predicted 5 days of fog. They got 3. In those 3 days, the weather advantage that was supposed to ensure German victory disappeared. American air power, once unleashed, transformed the battle. German forces, unable to advance faster than American reinforcements could concentrate, found themselves increasingly surrounded. The tactical initiative, which Germany had seized on December 16th, now belonged to America. The American reinforcement race against time. When the German offensive began, General Eisenhower immediately committed American reserves. The 82nd Airborne Division was pulled from rest and deployed to the Ardennes. The 101st Airborne was airlifted to Bastogne. Armored divisions were diverted northward. Within 72 hours, American commanders had committed over 300,000 additional troops to contain the German offensive. The American logistics system, more efficient than the German equivalent, managed this massive redeployment while maintaining supply lines to existing positions. Within a week, American numerical superiority had become overwhelming. General Omar Bradley, the American commander, initially considered the situation dire. He recommended to Eisenhower that American forces withdraw to prepared defensive positions. But Eisenhower refused. Eisenhower understood that Germany had committed everything to this offensive. If the Germans failed, and Eisenhower was increasingly confident they would, Germany would be crippled. German armor reserves would be exhausted. German troops would be trapped in difficult terrain where American air power could annihilate them. Eisenhower decided that American forces would attack, not defend. They would drive into the German flanks and envelop German forces. Instead of containing the German offensive, they would destroy it. The turning point, December 26 to 27, 1944. By December 26, the battle's outcome was clear to anyone with strategic perspective. German forces had not achieved breakthrough. American forces controlled Bastogne. American air power had achieved complete superiority. German supply lines were breaking down. German fuel reserves were exhausted. German armor losses were catastrophic. German forces began to retreat. But the battle was far from over. German commanders, understanding that the strategic situation was hopeless, still believed that tactical success was possible. They committed fresh reserves, brought forward new panzer divisions, and tried again. But each German attack ran into American defenses that were now better coordinated, better supplied, and supported by overwhelming air power. German tanks attacking in daylight were shredded by American aircraft. German infantry attacking across open terrain was cut down by American machine guns and artillery. The German 5th Panzer Army and 6th Panzer Army, committed to the offensive, suffered enormous losses. German tankers who had survived campaigns in Russia and France were killed in brutal close-range tank battles in Belgian forests. German infantry divisions, consisting largely of young, untrained replacements, suffered casualty rates of 50, 60, even 70%. German losses were irreplaceable. Germany, fighting a two-front war against forces with overwhelming industrial capacity, could not replace lost tanks, vehicles, or trained soldiers. Every tank destroyed was a tank that wouldn't be available for defense against the Soviet offensive in the east. The American response: cold, hunger, and determination. American soldiers in the Bulge faced conditions as brutal as German soldiers. Temperatures dropped to 20 degrees below zero. Snow fell continuously. American troops, supplied by the Red Ball Express and other logistics networks, received winter clothing and supplies, but they were still cold, hungry, and exhausted. American infantrymen suffered frostbite, trench foot, and combat exhaustion from days of continuous fighting. American tank crews, trying to keep engines warm in sub-zero temperatures, became physically and mentally depleted. But American morale remained high. American soldiers understood that Germany was making a last desperate gamble. They understood that if they held, Germany would collapse. American officers, from Eisenhower down to company commanders, communicated confidence and purpose. American troops believed they would win. They fought with determination and skill that surprised German commanders who had expected American forces to break when facing overwhelming German armor. American logistics, maintained despite severe winter conditions and German air attacks, kept American forces supplied with ammunition, fuel, and food. American field hospitals evacuated wounded at rates that German medical services could never achieve. American aircraft, once weather permitted, provided close air support that devastated German forces. American artillery, with superior fire control and coordination, concentrated firepower on German positions with mechanical precision. American forces, though facing tactical disadvantage in terrain and surprise, possessed systematic advantages that proved decisive. The collapse, January 1 to 15, 1945. By January 1, 1945, the outcome was clear to everyone except Hitler and his closest advisors. German forces were being pushed back along the entire front. American forces, attacking from south and north, were encircling German spearheads. German attempts to break through American lines were failing. German air power had been committed to failed operations and suffered losses it couldn't replace. German strategy, which required total victory in 5 to 10 days, had failed in 48 hours. For 2 weeks, German and American forces fought in brutal conditions. The weather remained cold. Snow covered the ground. German forces retreated slowly, fighting delaying actions, trying to extract armor and reduce casualties. American forces pursued, trying to encircle German formations and force their surrender. The fighting was as intense as any battle on the Western Front, but it was now clearly a German defeat. By January 15th, the last German offensive had been contained and reversed. German forces had not reached the Meuse River. German forces had not captured Bastogne. German forces had not split the American and British armies. The entire German offensive had failed. Over 200,000 German soldiers had been committed to the operation. Approximately 100,000 were casualties. Approximately 1,400 German tanks and assault guns had been committed. Approximately 800 were destroyed or captured. German losses were catastrophic. American forces suffered approximately 75,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or captured. American tank losses were also severe, but Americans had the industrial capacity to replace them. For every American tank destroyed, American factories produced 10 more. Germany, by contrast, had lost irreplaceable armor reserves that should have been defending the Rhine against the Soviet offensive. The strategic consequence: Germany's final collapse. The Battle of the Bulge sealed Germany's fate. The German offensive had consumed the last reserves of German armor and trained soldiers. The German army, which had been slowly retreating since the invasion of Normandy 18 months earlier, now had no hope of holding any defensive line. German forces were worn down, depleted, and facing enemies with overwhelming superiority. Within weeks of the battle's end, Soviet forces launched their final offensive from the east. German forces, already weakened by the Bulge, crumbled. Soviet armies drove toward Berlin. American and British forces crossed the Rhine and drove into Germany from the west. German military collapse accelerated. By May 1945, Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The Battle of the Bulge was Germany's last attempt to reverse its military fortunes. When it failed, there was no hope left. The war in Europe would end in total German defeat. The question changed from, can Germany win? To, how much of Germany will the Soviets occupy? The Bulge had made that question inevitable. Why the German gamble failed? German planners had made several critical miscalculations. First, they underestimated American reaction speed and coordination. American command, though initially surprised, adapted rapidly. Within 48 hours, Eisenhower had committed reserves and established a coherent response. Within 72 hours, American commanders were counterattacking. German planners had expected American forces to take much longer to organize. Second, German planners overestimated the effect of weather. They predicted 5 days of fog. They received 3. During those 3 days, American air power devastated German forces. German planners had not anticipated that American air forces, once they could operate, would achieve near-total superiority so quickly. Third, German planners underestimated supply requirements. German tanks consumed fuel at higher rates than anticipated. Roads became clogged with vehicles. Supply lines stretched dangerously. German forces ran out of fuel before they could achieve breakthrough. American forces, better supplied and better organized logistically, maintained the ability to fight while German forces had to halt for lack of fuel. Fourth, German planners overestimated the quality of German infantry and the training of German crews. Most German troops committed to the offensive were replacement soldiers with minimal training. German tank crews, while experienced, couldn't overcome American numerical superiority and American coordination. Finally, German planners overestimated the political effect of German military success. German strategy required that a tactical victory would force political separation between Americans and British, and between allies generally. German planners believed that if they achieved a tactical breakthrough, the Western powers would negotiate peace and abandon the Soviet Union. This was pure fantasy. The Western powers, despite tensions, remained committed to defeating Germany completely. The human dimension. Behind the strategic analysis were individual soldiers living through extraordinary hardship. American tankers, driving Sherman tanks in sub-zero temperatures, faced German Panthers and Tigers in close-range combat. American infantrymen, freezing in foxholes, repelled German assaults wave after wave. American medics treated the wounded in conditions of extreme cold. American officers made decisions that sent their soldiers forward knowing many would not return. German tankers, many of them veterans of the Russian front, fought with skill and courage. German infantry, though poorly trained, fought stubbornly for their homeland. German soldiers endured cold, hunger, and the knowledge that their country was losing. Many German soldiers died in the Bulge knowing the war was already lost. Individual acts of heroism emerged that would be remembered. American tank commanders who pressed attacks despite being outnumbered. American infantrymen who held positions against German assault. American pilots who flew close air support in dangerous conditions. German soldiers who fought with discipline despite impossible odds. The battle that determined the war's end. The Battle of the Bulge was not, strategically, the turning point of the war. The war had been decided earlier at Normandy, in the air war over Germany, and by the sheer industrial capacity of the Allied powers. The Bulge was Germany's last gamble, and it failed. But it was significant because it demonstrated, conclusively, that Germany could no longer hope for anything except total defeat. The battle demonstrated the power of American logistics, American air power, American coordination, and American industrial capacity. American forces, initially surprised, adapted and responded effectively. American commanders made good decisions under pressure. American soldiers fought with skill and courage despite facing tactical disadvantage in terrain and initial surprise. The battle also demonstrated the limits of German military capability. German officers were skilled, but skill alone couldn't overcome overwhelming American numerical and industrial superiority. German soldiers were brave, but bravery alone couldn't defeat organized, well-supplied forces. German strategy was bold, but boldness alone couldn't reverse fundamental strategic realities. By the end of January 1945, German forces had suffered a catastrophic defeat. German armor reserves, supposed to defend the Rhine and hold Germany proper, had been exhausted in the Bulge. German defensive lines in Germany would crumble within weeks. Soviet forces would drive to Berlin. American forces would drive to the heart of Germany. German military collapse would follow swiftly. The Battle of the Bulge was the moment when Germany's last hope died. After the Bulge, only the details of German surrender remained. The outcome was certain. The war in Europe would end in total German defeat. The Bulge had made that outcome inevitable.